think going back to the corners of the car, this is where I'd say we get back to what is normally in the scope of this setup seminar. We'll start basically with each corner of the car and the different adjustments that are there. Why there's shims where it could just be easier to just made the part to fit. The hub carriers with these shims, you can see on here, they're all the way forward. When you move that forward, it gets more weight over the rear end of the car. That's going to give it more forward drive. It's going to make the rear feel heavier, so it also can help get it in. When you pull them back, the gain is when you get on throttle, it'll turn more on throttle. However, your entry will be also a little more subdued. This car's a little longer, the weight's not slung over the rear. That, like we were saying for grip, we're all the way forward. I think to come back on what I was saying earlier, a couple rules of thumb. You want to start in vanilla. And I say that it's keep things equal, keep things even. And that's simple. Yeah, it's not. There's no crazy exotics. I mean, the more crazy stuff we try, or when we try something that's not our norm, it's the only one thing we're trying. And then probably 9 times out of 10, it's like that really wasn't great.
Going back.
Yeah, you end up going back to what you knew and what was a good friend. Secondly, when you see things on the car, multiple different setup parts that are all maxed out, you're either begging for bite, like you kind of are this weekend, so I kind of feel like it's the exception a little bit, or there's something over dominant on the car. If there was a lot more bite and you have, let's say, two really soft right front spring, and you got a super heavy right rear spring, and the wings all the way forward, something's, you're trying to make the car's trying to turn, you're trying to make it turn with the car, but the right front's a completely worn out rib, then you're never ever going to come tired it's not working on the car. So there's an over dominant feature that you're working against that's not playing in balance. I think when you find your car and you have more things towards the center ranges of their settings, it's easier to tune things, so you're not always begging. But this weekend, keeping the hubs forward. Nathan usually on loose start loves having his hubs forward all the time just to get the grip, and he likes that rear to feel like it's slinging out.
And I was gonna talk about the springs for a second. A lot of times, over the weekend, a lot of people brought their car over, and I ask them what they're doing, what it's doing, and they tell me and everything. And first thing I check is, and it's happened quite often, and to be quite honest, I'm looking at this and I'm pretty close, is you reach a certain point when you
Mr. Murphy, can we see you at the scoring stand, please? Mr. Murphy.
Pressure up or down on this spring, that you've reached a certain point that it's now time for a spring change. And with CustomWorks springs, we have a spring kit, and give or take, but each increment is about a pound. So honestly, on the left rear where I'm at right now, you can see that right rear, left rear, I'm not that far away. If I was, when we went out, I had Arnie crank down because my car was loose on the left rear to give me more drive. We're probably maybe a turn or two away that I would be like, okay, I'm getting my wedge off a little bit. It's now time to go, and our colors would now be a green. Green, and then bring that tension back up on the collar a little bit, because what's going to happen is you're gonna, and this is huge. Arnie can continue from here because this is his. He's big on this. Is keeping your car equal balanced and keeping the wedge and everything right. So
these collars, all they do is they adjust the ride height. Think of it like 4 legs on a table. And when I'm using that word, keep it vanilla, we'll set the ride height on the car. Usually they're measuring it with $20 a pair of calipers from Harbor Freight or McMaster or whoever. Good car tire rock. I was late model tire rock. It's just simple. I know there's depth gauges underneath, but this is so handy for a multitude of things. But they just use the bottom side of it. Just measure to the top of the chassis. You can feel it just like you do underneath. chassis are all typically about 100 thousandths thick. It doesn't matter if there were some random number, it's just relevant to you at that point. So right now his is measuring at that point in the car like 960, so it's really 860 under the car. You really want to know how much clearance it has at that, underneath. But for that sense of vanilla, we'll start with the ride height equal to all four corners. Basically spread it out amongst the chassis. A sprint car, you kind of measure right up to the neck, and right back here. The newer Pro-Comp chassis, there's a little like teardrop on the back corners, so you can actually get to it with this. So you're not trying to slide a little block and you get some dirt on your table, and the next thing you know, your block's up half a millimeter if you hit them. But that's an easy way to infallibly make sure that you're starting somewhere in the middle of the ballpark. You're not attitude one way or the other. It's easy to take your imagination, and if the car was sitting like this, it should be tight all day long. It should never get to the front. If its rear ride height's way much higher than the front, it's already acting like it's one to turn in. It's going to be way aggressive, and it's always going to be lacking forward grip, especially in the sense when we're trying to keep. I say balance is maybe it's just ration or spend wisely the little bit of grip we got.
It's just really easy to start turning a collar here. It's a great, you always want to start there because it's so easy to start turning the collar here, go out, try something, turn. Before you know it, 20 minutes later, your car is so out of adjustment that it doesn't matter what you do to it now. You're not going to really feel your changes at all.
This is a good, I guess what I'm doing is trying to give you a good ideology of where to get centered on your setup. Get centered on your car, and then you will do what you want out there. I mean, if it's turning in too hard, you're going to probably put some turns in the right front. You'll do what naturally comes to you, but when you come back, and that's what Nathan's talking about by looking at his collars and looking at how his car's sitting, he realizes, okay, so what parts and pieces are in this car right now? It still needs a little bit more grip. What can I do to get that and get ride heights back closer to center? Because he's jacked. As you turn that you turn that collar, you're changing ride height. Even though you want to change just weight, you're going to change ride height. The way it goes, and this is, I think, the trick on what he was asking for at that moment was, if you turn this collar down, you get all one direction help for being, for curing loose. As long as you've got travel for it to go down. If it doesn't have up, if it's not sitting down in the spring, turning that collar is only going to preload the spring. It's not going to jack any weight. It's not going to change anything. And that's where you see a lot of people get frustrated when their cars aren't sitting down into their springs. They've already got the collars. Everything's preloaded out. So when you turn that collar down and you raise that corner, you're raising the corner of the car. You're jacking more weight on the left rear. So everything's adding in the same bucket to get tighter. So you're going to get tight. It should be a help. When you come back here, well, I'm jacking weight and I'm jacking the collar down. I'm putting left rear into it, so I put a chip in that bucket. But I'm also raising the rear ride height and leaning it towards the right front, so it's going this way. So that's another chip in that bucket. So you just did a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. Why would you turn that? He wanted to get into the corner a little bit better. He didn't feel like it was cutting in as quick, but he needed more to get off. So by giving him a little bit of left rear, it also put wedge in the car, helped it off, but it also attitude the car, so it already wanted to get in the corner a little bit. That is what you're balancing. You're balancing your weights versus the attitude. And if one's at an extreme mode versus the other, the one at the extreme always wins out. And that's what I was talking about. If the car is much lower, overly low to the rear versus the front, it doesn't matter how much wedge or non-wedge you have in it. It's going to act like it's tight all the time. Or if it's always leaning down to the front, it doesn't matter what pound rate front spring you put on or what, it's going to always act like a car that's trying to get into the corner because the attitude of the car's already there. And by starting level, it does two things. You have no attitude in the car. It's sitting dead level. When you see it do what it wants on the track, you know that's what it's trying to do naturally. And second, because there's some left side weight in the car, when you set it up level, ultimately you're going to have some left rear in the car. You're already going to have a little bit of wedge built in, and that's going to keep the car honest. to get a little further on that one point with the weights and wedges, that's where the scales come in handy. These are from Target online. They have a couple scales in the store I left over the holidays, and I bought a pair and returned them like a day later, and they were junk. A lot of times if you twist them, you see the numbers change. Just realize it being in your box for 2-3 weeks, it's getting treated a lot worse than that. But $25 for each scale. And that's the Galley brand. You can have every color you want. But long story short, once you get the car sitting equal in ride height, find yourself a nice flat board. You'll set the car down and you just kind of bump it, so it can find its own center. And what we'll generally do if we've never started somewhere is we'll start with the ride height the wheel weights equal in the front, and you can adjust that. Say if long here, Nathan's gonna have a lot of wedge out of this. So if I wanted to equal up the weights on his car, equal to the front, it's 14 over here and 8. So what I would do to do that and keep the ride height equal is I take one out of here, put one in here, put one in here, take one out of there. So for each one you push down, you release, and so keep that same, think of it like keeping a table level, but you're going to change which corners of the table are holding all the weight, and that's how you'll jack the weight to keep the ride height the same. That's why a lot of times we'll make adjustments. We'll do one turn in, and then if you need to go further in that direction, one turn out, just to change, not to change the attitude, just to change the weight. If you needed to change the attitude and make the car turn all the way through, you take both rear collars and put them both turned down. Or the front, you don't see the front coming down as far as you want it. You might take both front collars and turn both of them out, keeping the wedge in the car so there's some drive, but getting the attitude so it'll cut in a little quicker, so that front end will come down. Cut. That particular example, I think, saves a lot of the late models. I think the better late models you see the car run pretty level down straightaway, but when they come in the corner, you see the nose is come down and they make the cut. The nose comes back up, transfers weight back to the rear, and you got it. So that it comes into play. I know this is a lot to swallow, as fast as we're talking. If any of you have questions, please ask. If you have questions tomorrow, come back and ask.
Any advantage 4 scales versus 3?
Disadvantage, more shit to carry. You just got to turn it around. It's nice. It's nice to have, but as you take them on and off, and then $100 versus $50, just choose for me. It don't matter either way.
So let's